TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with my cooking skills and nearly burning down the house. It all started about a month ago. My girlfriend and I had been dating for a little over 6 months, and everything was going smoothly. We'd spent a lot of time together, doing the usual things, watching movies, grabbing dinner, going on walks, and occasionally binge-watching random series on Netflix. But I noticed something: she always seemed to cook these amazing meals for us. Like, gourmet-level stuff. I'm talking beautifully seared steaks, intricate pasta dishes, and mouth-watering desserts. Meanwhile, I was stuck in my kitchen, scrambling eggs and reheating frozen pizza. I was tired of feeling like the low-effort boyfriend, so one night I decided I was going to make her dinner. I had never really cooked much before, aside from the occasional instant ramen, but how hard could it be? I thought to myself. I had watched enough cooking shows and YouTube tutorials, so I figured I knew what I was doing. I was going to surprise her with a homemade 3-course meal. I started small, at first, scouring the internet for simple yet impressive recipes. I settled on a steak dinner with a side of roasted vegetables and mashed potatoes. For dessert, I thought I'd throw in a chocolate lava cake, because, nothing says I'm a great boyfriend like molten chocolate oozing out of a cake. I'm sure you're already wondering how this went south. Well, let's just say the road to hell is paved with good intentions and poorly executed cooking plans. The first step was buying the ingredients. I went to the grocery store, armed with my list, and immediately realized I had no idea what half of the ingredients even looked like. I spent 10 minutes staring at a section of meat, trying to figure out the difference between ribeye and sirloin, until a random shopper took pity on me and pointed me in the right direction. I also had a meltdown over the potatoes, convinced I'd accidentally bought sweet potatoes instead of russets. In my defense, they all looked the same, and I'd never had to choose between them before. Once I had everything, I went back home and began preparing the meal. I started with the steak, since I figured that would take the longest. I'd seen so many professional chefs talk about the importance of getting the perfect sear, so I knew I had to get that right. I set the pan on high heat, threw in some oil, and boom, within seconds, smoke started billowing out of the pan. The oil splashed up and hit my hand, which made me yelp in pain, but I soldiered on. I wasn't going to let this setback stop me from becoming a Michelin star chef, no sir. The steak was, well, let's just say it was a little more charred than I intended. It wasn't the tender, medium-rare perfection I had envisioned. In fact, I'm pretty sure I accidentally made charcoal instead of a steak. But hey, I thought, I could salvage this with the mashed potatoes. Potatoes were simple, right? Wrong. The recipe said to boil the potatoes until they were fork tender, but after waiting for what felt like hours, I realized the water was never going to boil because I had forgotten to turn on the stove. By the time I fixed that mistake, I had already ruined my steam time, and the potatoes were way too mushy. I tried mashing them with a fork, but they ended up looking like baby food. Desperate, I threw in a ton of butter, hoping that would somehow fix the situation. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Next, I moved on to the roasted vegetables. I was feeling confident, thinking this would be the easiest part of the whole meal. I tossed some carrots, zucchini, and bell peppers in olive oil, salt, and pepper, and shoved them into the oven at what I thought was the right temperature. I had read somewhere that vegetables roast best at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, but I'd forgotten to check if the oven was preheated. So I set it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and after 10 minutes, I opened the oven to find that the veggies were more shriveled than roasted. They looked sad, limp, and completely unappetizing. But by this point, I was in too deep. I couldn't give up now. My girlfriend was expecting a beautiful, romantic dinner, and I had to deliver. So, I pushed through and assembled the plate as best as I could. The steak looked like something you'd find at the bottom of a dumpster after a fire, the mashed potatoes were a soupy mess, and the roasted vegetables were, well, let's just say I hoped she wouldn't notice. The grand finale was the chocolate lava cake. I was determined to get this right. I followed the recipe to the letter, mixing the ingredients carefully and filling the ramekins to the perfect level. I even used a spoon to create a little pocket in the center, just like the chef on the tutorial did. It seemed perfect. After baking them, I pulled them out of the oven, and the tops looked gorgeous. They had that perfectly cracked look you see in food photos. I had done it. I was about to be crowned Chef of the Year in my girlfriend's eyes. I let them cool for a few minutes, then inverted the ramekins onto the plates. When I flipped the first one, nothing came out. It just sat there like a sad, deflated pancake. I tapped the ramekin a little more forcefully, and the cake finally slid out, completely deflated and resembling a sad, gooey blob. Undeterred, I pushed it to the side and tried again with the second one. This time, the cake came out looking somewhat intact, but the molten chocolate inside had hardened. I had baked it for too long. At this point, I was exhausted, frustrated, and borderline defeated. But I didn't want to disappoint her. She was going to be home in 20 minutes, and I wasn't about to tell her everything had gone horribly wrong. I decided to just power through. I plated everything: steak, mashed potatoes, sad vegetables, and the unfortunate lava cake, and set the table. She came in just as I was finishing. She looked at the food and smiled. "Wow, you really went all out," she said, clearly trying to mask the shock. I immediately started apologizing. I tried, but it's not perfect. I know it doesn't look great, but I really wanted to impress you. She took a deep breath, looked at me with that mixture of affection and concern, and said, "Babe, it's fine. You tried. And that's what matters." We sat down to eat, and honestly, the meal was awful. I won't sugarcoat it. The steak tasted like leather, the mashed potatoes were a sad, buttery mess, and the vegetables were barely edible. But she ate everything on her plate with a smile, even though I could see her gagging at some points. As we finished up, she put her fork down and said, "Okay, we need to have a serious talk." I braced myself for the worst, but instead, she just said, "Next time, let's maybe order in. I'm all for supporting your passion for cooking, but maybe we stick to something simpler?" We both laughed, and I promised to never again attempt such an ambitious meal unless I had taken a cooking class first. I learned 2 important lessons that night. 1. Never try to impress your partner with something you're not prepared for, and 2. Sometimes, the effort is more important than the result. Even if the result involves a near-house fire, ruined food, and a very forgiving girlfriend. But, hey, at least I'm now the proud owner of a charred steak recipe no one will ever forget. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by accidentally starting a massive argument between my parents and almost ruining my family's Thanksgiving dinner. So, this all started a few months ago when I decided I wanted to be the cool kid in the family. My parents are divorced, and they've been on shaky terms ever since the split. They're both remarried, and I have a stepmom and stepdad now, and the family gatherings are always a little tense. For the most part, we try to be cordial, but let's just say there's more passive aggressiveness than actual warmth at these get-togethers. Thanksgiving was coming up, and I thought to myself, this year, I'm going to make it different. I'll be the glue that holds the family together. I got this idea that I could take charge and arrange a dinner that would include everyone: my mom, my dad, my stepmom, my stepdad, and all the siblings. Everyone. No one left behind. It sounded great in my head. So, I texted the group chat, got the ball rolling, and, to my surprise, everyone was down. Things started to fall apart almost immediately. First, I should clarify that my dad and my mom's relationship is complicated. There's a lot of history there, a lot of unresolved issues. They're both emotionally immature, and any interaction can turn into a full-blown drama fest. My stepmom, on the other hand, is very sweet but has a tendency to throw passive-aggressive jabs at my dad every now and then, especially if he says something stupid. My stepdad is the type of guy who doesn't get involved in drama, but if you corner him, he'll drop a sarcastic remark that somehow manages to irritate everyone. So yeah, not the best mix, but it's family, right? I decided that for Thanksgiving, we could all bring a dish and make it feel like a big, shared meal. I thought it would be fun. My mom could bring her famous mashed potatoes, my dad would bring his secret recipe stuffing, which he always brags about, and I could cook the turkey, because I'm apparently the only one who knows how to cook a decent bird. I got this whole plan together, sent out a group text about what everyone would bring, and I was feeling pretty confident that this was going to be the year everything clicked. And then, of course, it all fell apart when the first issue popped up. My dad, being my dad, immediately started telling everyone that his stuffing was the best, and no one else should even try to bring anything close. He didn't say it outright, but you could feel the thinly veiled jab at my mom's cooking. My mom, being who she is, took this as a personal attack on her mashed potatoes, and she started sending all these passive-aggressive messages in the group chat like, well, I guess my mashed potatoes are just too basic for some people. At this point, the tension was already palpable, but I still tried to push forward. Then came the second issue, my stepmom. She's a great cook, and I love her to death, but she decided to make the most absurd request. She wanted to bring a quinoa salad. No one asked for quinoa. No one likes quinoa. But she insisted that it was a healthier option, and everyone would appreciate it. I was like, okay, fine. It's your choice, but it's Thanksgiving. People are expecting stuffing, not kale and quinoa. But that was my mistake, because I didn't voice my opinion directly. Instead, I passively allowed the quinoa salad to become a part of the meal. Big mistake. It set the stage for disaster. On the big day, we all gathered at my mom's house, and things were going well, at first. Everyone was polite, trying to make small talk, and the food was looking amazing. Then my stepdad showed up. This is when things really went south. I was in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on the turkey when I heard my stepdad make a sarcastic comment about how my mom's house smelled a little too much like Thanksgiving and not enough like an actual meal. I didn't catch everything, but I heard the words "not enough variety" thrown around. I knew my mom was already tense, so I knew this was the spark that would start the fire. My mom, of course, didn't take that well. She immediately shot back with something like, well, I'm sorry if you don't like tradition, but this is how we do things around here. The argument escalated from there. My dad chimed in, trying to defend my mom, but it only made things worse. He said something about how stepdad should just be grateful we're all even here, and stepdad, not one to back down, fired back with a comment about how he didn't think it was fair that Thanksgiving always had to be my mom's thing, implying that my mom was too controlling about the holiday. At this point, I was still in the kitchen, but I could hear the conversation getting louder. Everyone was arguing now. My stepmom tried to intervene, but she made the situation worse by defending the quinoa salad like it was some sort of sacred offering, and that was the final straw for my dad. He went off, saying something like, "Who brings quinoa to Thanksgiving? This is a holiday about comfort food, not some health fad." My mom started crying, and that's when I knew the whole dinner was doomed. I walked into the living room and tried to defuse the situation, but it only got worse. My dad and stepdad were at each other's throats. My mom was sobbing about how she didn't even want to be part of the family anymore, and my stepmom was just standing there, looking horrified but also holding her quinoa salad like it was the crown jewel of Thanksgiving. I tried to salvage the dinner, but it was too late. The damage had been done. By the time dessert rolled around, no one was speaking to each other. The once cheerful atmosphere of Thanksgiving had transformed into a tense silence, broken only by the occasional clink of silverware. I realized that in my attempt to bring everyone together, I had only succeeded in highlighting the deep-rooted issues that had been simmering under the surface for years. The rest of the day passed in awkward silence. I didn't even get to enjoy the pumpkin pie because everyone was too busy sulking in their own corners of the house. My mom and dad didn't even speak after the argument, and my stepdad and stepmom left early, probably to go fight in the comfort of their own home. So yeah, I totally ruined Thanksgiving. I thought I was going to be the hero who brought everyone together, but instead, I was the one who lit the fuse on a bomb that exploded in my face. It turns out sometimes the best intentions can lead to the worst outcomes. Now, every Thanksgiving after that, I get asked if I'm planning to cook the turkey again, and let me tell you, I'm more than happy to leave that job to someone else. TLDR, I tried to host a Thanksgiving dinner with my parents, step-parents, and siblings to bring everyone together, but it ended in a huge argument about food, a crying mom, and a ruined dinner. Guess I'm not the family hero after all. It all started on a Tuesday. It was just another average day at work, filled with Zoom calls, emails, and trying not to stare at the clock as it ticked slowly toward 5 p.m. My girlfriend, Emma, had sent me a text that morning with a cute selfie of her in bed, just before getting up for work. She looked stunning as usual, and I felt a little guilty for not being able to give her more of my attention because I was buried in work. But we were both busy and understanding, so we kept our chats light and fun throughout the day. By the afternoon, I was starting to feel a bit distracted. We were working on an important project, and I had a meeting with a client at 3 p.m., but all I could think about was how much I wanted to talk to Emma. Her text had been on my mind, and I decided to send her something cute back. I had just finished a call and was taking a quick break, scrolling through my phone when I saw a new message from her pop up. It was a picture of her dog, Charlie, sitting on her lap with the caption, "Charlie misses you, red heart." It was adorable. I couldn't help but smile and decided to send her a playful message in return. I had just come up with the perfect reply, "I miss you too, babe. Can't wait to be home and cuddle with you. Maybe we can find some new spots to make out tonight, winky face." Feeling pretty confident in my flirtation skills, I quickly typed the message and hit send. But here's the thing, I had also been chatting with my boss, James, earlier in the day. We were working on a few things related to an upcoming presentation, and I was coordinating with him to finalize some details. We had exchanged some emails, and I was just about to respond to one of his texts when I made a critical mistake. You see, I was on my phone, and it was a bit of a mess with multiple conversations open. As I went to hit send on the message for Emma, I accidentally tapped James' contact instead of hers. My thumb slid just a little too far to the left, and before I even realized what had happened, I saw the dreaded delivered notification. My heart sank. I froze for a moment. Did I just send that text to my boss? The text that was supposed to be for my girlfriend? The one that said, "I miss you too, babe. Can't wait to be home and cuddle with you. Maybe we can find some new spots to make out tonight, winky face." I immediately went into panic mode. I quickly opened the conversation with James and saw that, yes, indeed, the message had been sent. My mind raced. How could I fix this? What was I supposed to do? I could feel my face turn bright red. I had just sent the most unprofessional, inappropriate, and downright awkward text to my boss. James had never given me any indication that he was the cuddling type, let alone interested in making out with anyone. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I knew I had to act fast, but what could I even say at this point? If I tried to explain myself, it would only make the situation worse. I could already imagine the awkward silence in the office the next day if I admitted what had happened. I had to come up with something better than that. I frantically started typing a response, hoping to dig myself out of this hole. "Sorry. That was meant for my girlfriend," I wrote. "That was definitely not for you." It was a terrible attempt at salvaging the situation, but at least it was something. I hovered my thumb over the send button, contemplating the best way to explain myself without sounding like a complete idiot. But before I could hit send, the 3 little dots popped up on my screen. James was typing. I froze. I had no idea what he was going to say, but I feared the worst. What if he thought I was being inappropriate? What if he was going to confront me about it? My heart was pounding in my chest as I waited for his response. And then it came. "Ha, no worries," James replied. "I just thought it was a little sudden for our meeting later today." I sat there, staring at my phone in shock. Was he joking? Was he actually cool about it? I couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic or if he was genuinely unfazed by the message I had just sent. But the awkwardness was palpable, even through a text message. I had no idea how to respond to that. I didn't want to leave it hanging, so I decided to send a follow-up message. "Yeah, definitely meant for Emma. I need to stop multitasking. Sorry about that." James took a few minutes to reply again, and when he did, it was in typical James fashion, calm, collected, and somehow making the situation even more uncomfortable. "All good. Just don't accidentally send me any more flirtatious texts, okay?" he wrote with a laughing emoji. My face was now completely red. I couldn't believe this was happening. There was no way I was going to live this down. The rest of the afternoon felt like it dragged on forever. I couldn't focus on anything, and every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, half expecting it to be a follow-up from James or one of my colleagues commenting on the situation. Fortunately, the rest of the day passed without incident. I tried to avoid talking to James in person, opting instead to email him any updates we needed for the project. But I knew that the next time I saw him in person, things would be awkward, no matter how cool he seemed in the messages. Later that evening, I finally talked to Emma. I told her about the disaster, and she couldn't stop laughing. "Oh my God," she said, "you've definitely set the bar high for office relationships now. Don't worry, though, we all make mistakes." In the end, James and I never really discussed the incident in person, but every time we exchanged a message after that, I couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable. It's been weeks now, and every time I send him a text, I still think about that embarrassing moment. But at least he didn't fire me, and I learned the hard way not to multitask while texting. So, that's the story of how I accidentally sent my boss a flirtatious message meant for my girlfriend. It's a mistake I'll never make again. At least I hope I won't. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a homemade dinner and ending up setting off the fire alarm, burning the food, and accidentally trapping us both in the apartment for hours. So, I, 25M, have this crush on a girl from work, Emma, 24F. She's funny, smart, and has the kind of smile that makes you feel like you just won the lottery whenever she looks at you. We've hung out in groups a couple of times, and recently, we'd started texting more. Eventually, I decided that it was time to make a move. I'm not a huge cook, but I figured, hey, how hard can it be to make a nice meal for her? It's a great way to impress her. Spoiler alert, I was so wrong. I decided to go with a classic, pasta. Simple, elegant, and easy to mess up. I found a recipe online that seemed foolproof: pasta with a homemade tomato basil sauce. How could I go wrong? I grabbed all the ingredients from the store, spent the whole afternoon nervously prepping, and made sure the apartment was spotless. The place was looking like something straight out of a Pinterest board. Emma arrived right on time, and I greeted her at the door, feeling more confident than I probably should have. She seemed really impressed with how clean the apartment looked, and she complimented me on my setup, which definitely boosted my ego. Things were going perfectly. I started boiling the water for the pasta, and then I began making the sauce. As I was simmering the tomatoes, garlic, and basil, I noticed the apartment was starting to smell amazing. I was feeling like a master chef at this point, thinking, I've got this. She's gonna love this meal. The pasta was cooking, the sauce was bubbling just right, and I was casually chatting with her in the living room. We talked about work, life, all the usual small talk that makes you feel like you're getting to know someone. Here's where I should have slowed down. I was getting distracted by our conversation, and in the process, I forgot about the garlic in the pan. I left it on too long, and the garlic started to burn. I could hear the faint smell of something off, but by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I rushed over to the stove, panicked, and tried to fix it. But in my haste, I ended up splashing oil everywhere, causing more smoke to fill the air. Then, the unthinkable happened. The smoke detector went off. Now, I had a decision to make: either try to turn off the alarm or handle the situation like a pro and keep my cool. Obviously, I tried to do both and failed spectacularly. In my panicked state, I fumbled with the alarm and accidentally knocked the ladder over, which sent a vase off a table and broke it. Emma was standing there, eyes wide, trying to figure out if I was really as much of a mess as I seemed or if it was all part of the plan. I turned back to the stove, desperately trying to salvage the pasta and sauce, but the garlic was now burned beyond recognition. The sauce had somehow thickened into this unappetizing paste, and the pasta was stuck to the bottom of the pot in a way that made it look like I was trying to cook cement. I figured at this point it was better to just salvage the evening by serving what I had rather than admitting defeat. So, I plated the disaster and served it up with a forced smile, hoping she wouldn't notice the charred mess on her plate. She took a bite. And then another. And another. I could see her struggling to hold back a grimace. It was painful to watch. But she tried to be polite, nodding every now and then, saying, "Oh, it's, interesting." I could feel my heart sinking deeper with each word. My stomach was in knots, and I knew I had failed, but I couldn't bring myself to admit it. Then, just as she set down her fork, the fire alarm went off again. I'd forgotten to open the windows to air out the smoke. The whole apartment was starting to smell like burnt rubber, and I could tell Emma was trying to be kind, but she was looking for an excuse to leave. I felt embarrassed, humiliated, and frustrated. All I wanted was to impress her, and instead, I had created the culinary equivalent of a dumpster fire. We decided to leave the apartment and stand outside on the balcony to escape the smoke. I opened the door, but then the worst possible thing happened. The door slammed shut behind us. We were locked out. Of course, the spare key was inside. I had no way to get back in. Now, we were stuck outside, in the cold, with nothing to do but awkwardly stand there and try to make small talk while I silently cursed myself for everything that had gone wrong. She was cold, I was cold, and we both knew the evening was over. For the next few hours, we had to call the building's maintenance guy, who took forever to show up because, as it turns out, it was the weekend, and everyone was just trying to enjoy their time off. Emma and I stood there in silence for the most part, aside from a few random attempts at conversation that didn't quite hit the mark. Every so often, we'd laugh nervously about how ridiculous the situation was, but we both knew I had completely ruined it. When the maintenance guy finally arrived, he managed to get the door open, but by that point, the mood was so far gone that I knew any attempt to salvage the night would be futile. Emma politely excused herself, and I walked her down to her car, thanking her for being so understanding. And that was it. The worst part? I'm pretty sure she's avoided me ever since. I see her at work, and she gives me these awkward, sympathetic smiles. I don't know if she's just being nice, but I can't help but think I might have blown my chance. Moral of the story: never try to impress someone with a dinner if you don't know how to cook, and definitely don't forget to check your smoke detectors. Most importantly, don't ever lock yourself out when everything's already falling apart. I may never be able to look at pasta the same way again. TIFU by accidentally getting my friend kicked out of his own wedding. So, this happened last weekend, and I'm still not sure how I managed to screw up this badly. To give you some context, I've known Dave, not his real name, since college, and we've been thick as thieves ever since. We've shared a lot of life experiences, good, bad, and downright ugly. When Dave got engaged to his fiancée, Emily, I was over the moon for him. They seemed perfect for each other, and I couldn't wait for the wedding day. The day of the wedding came, and I was super excited. The venue was gorgeous, the ceremony was beautiful, and everything was going smoothly. I was catching up with some of the other guests, cracking jokes, and just generally having a good time. But I wasn't exactly the most sober person there. I mean, I'm not an alcoholic, but I had a few too many drinks. I blame the open bar, honestly. I tend to get a little talkative when I've had a couple, and let's just say my filter gets less effective. At some point during the reception, I ran into Dave. He was standing near the dance floor with some of his groomsmen, looking a little stressed. I figured he was just dealing with the usual wedding chaos, so I went over to chat with him. "Hey, man, how's it going?" I asked, slinging my arm around his shoulders. "Honestly? Pretty good. A little bit of drama with Emily's family, but nothing I can't handle," he replied with a forced smile. "Ah, weddings, right? Always some weird family stuff. But hey, you're getting married today. It's all good." Dave smiled weakly, but I could tell something was off. So, naturally, my drunk brain decided it was a great time to make a joke. "Yeah, but come on, man, how are you really feeling? You know you're about to sign away the rest of your life, right? No more wild nights out with the guys. No more late-night pizza runs. You're gonna be a married man." Now, looking back, I realize that was a terrible thing to say. But at the time, I just thought I was being funny. I figured it was the kind of joke friends make when one of them is about to get hitched, you know? Dave didn't laugh, though. He just stared at me, blinking. I immediately realized I'd gone too far. I didn't mean it like that," I stammered, trying to backtrack. "I just meant, it's a big step, right? Like, no more wild partying." Dave's face tightened, and his eyes darted nervously across the room. I was starting to feel like something was really off. "Look, man, you're kind of ruining the vibe here," he said quietly. "I really need to go talk to Emily. Just, don't say anything to anyone about what I just said, okay?" I immediately thought he was joking. He wasn't. I watched him walk off, clearly distressed, and I was left standing there, feeling like an idiot. I tried to shake it off and grab another drink, but I couldn't help feeling weird about what had just happened. I didn't think I'd said anything that bad, but I also didn't want to make things worse by talking about it. So I did what any responsible adult would do, I kept drinking. As the night went on, I noticed something strange. Dave and Emily seemed a little distant. They weren't interacting like I'd seen them do earlier, and Emily looked visibly upset. At one point, I overheard her talking to one of her bridesmaids, saying something about needing a break and how everything was falling apart. I tried not to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help overhearing. It wasn't until later, after I'd had a few more drinks and was stumbling around, that I ran into one of Dave's groomsmen. Let's call him Tom. Tom seemed pretty rattled, and when I asked him what was going on, he said, "Dave and Emily are about to call it quits. I don't think the wedding is going to happen." I was stunned. What? But everything seemed fine earlier. What happened? Tom looked uncomfortable, but then he lowered his voice. "It's because of you." At first, I thought he was messing with me, but Tom's face was serious. "What do you mean, me?" Apparently, Dave had been struggling with cold feet all day, and my comment about no more wild nights was the final straw. Emily had overheard me joking with him about marriage being the end of his freedom, and it had set off a chain reaction. She'd confronted him in the middle of the reception, and after a tearful conversation, Dave had stormed off to calm down. Emily was upset, Dave was upset, and the whole vibe of the wedding just collapsed. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I didn't mean for any of that to happen. I never thought my stupid joke could cause a rift like that. I tried to find Dave to apologize, but by the time I did, the damage had already been done. Dave and Emily ended up having a huge argument in front of the guests, and eventually, Dave announced that the wedding was off. Emily stormed out, and Dave followed her. There was an awkward silence for what felt like forever before the reception slowly started to unravel. People began leaving, the music stopped, and everything just kind of fell apart. The next day, I woke up with a massive hangover and a million texts and missed calls. Dave had texted me to say we needed to talk. I was dreading it, but I called him back anyway. He answered with a sigh. Dude, you really screwed things up. I know. I'm so sorry. I had no idea my stupid joke would cause all that. He was quiet for a second. Honestly, I don't think that's what ruined it. But you were the tipping point. You made me second-guess everything, and Emily, she overheard, man. It was like a bomb went off. I felt like I'd failed him. Here I was, supposed to be his best friend, and I'd made one of the worst mistakes of my life. We talked for a while, and while he wasn't angry at me, he made it clear that it was going to take a long time for things to heal between him and Emily. Eventually, I heard from Emily as well. She wasn't mad at me, but she made it clear that the wedding was off, and they needed some time apart to figure things out. I was crushed. The last thing I ever wanted to do was be the catalyst for the end of their wedding. To this day, they're still not married, and I'm honestly not sure where things stand between them. So yeah, I fucked up. A stupid, thoughtless joke about marriage ended up leading to a massive meltdown, and now my best friend's wedding is a wreck. I'm still trying to figure out how to make it right, but at this point, I don't think there's much I can do except learn from this. I really hope they find a way to fix things, but I'm honestly not sure if it'll ever be the same again. If you're reading this, take it from me, never joke about someone's relationship, especially when you're drunk. It can literally ruin everything. TIFU by thinking I could impress my friends by cooking a fancy meal and almost burning down my house in the process. I've always been the non-cook type. My culinary expertise typically involves microwaving frozen meals or tossing a frozen pizza in the oven. That's about the extent of my skills in the kitchen. However, after watching a few cooking shows and seeing some mouth-watering recipes on Instagram, I thought to myself, hey, I could totally do this. How hard can it be? I got a little cocky, and like a lot of people, I figured cooking for my friends would be the perfect way to prove I'm not just a useless couch potato. So, one weekend, I decided to invite a couple of my closest friends over for dinner. The idea was to cook a 3-course meal, appetizer, main course, and dessert. I wanted to impress them with something classy, so I picked out a recipe for a French onion soup appetizer, beef Wellington as the main dish, and a chocolate lava cake for dessert. After seeing the fancy dishes online, I convinced myself that it was totally within my reach. I went shopping at the local grocery store with a list that seemed harmless enough on paper, but in reality, was absurdly long. As I grabbed ingredients for the soup, beef Wellington, and the cake, I couldn't help but feel that I was starting to do something far above my level. But I pushed those doubts aside. After all, I was already spending a significant amount of money on this meal, so there was no turning back now. I got home, unpacked all the ingredients, and started setting everything up. The first dish to tackle was the French onion soup. The recipe called for slowly caramelizing onions for around 45 minutes. Easy, right? I threw the onions into a pan with some butter, set the heat to medium, and stirred occasionally. My kitchen started to smell amazing. I was feeling pretty good about myself. The onions were turning golden brown, and I was thinking, this is going to be a hit. But then, things started to take a turn. I got distracted by a text from a friend and didn't notice that the onions were starting to burn a little. No big deal, I thought. I turned the heat down and tried to salvage them. In my attempt to recover, I dropped the whole container of broth, spilling it everywhere and soaking the counter. But I persevered, adding in more liquid to get the soup back on track. It wasn't perfect, but I figured it would be fine once everything was blended. Next up, the beef Wellington. I had no idea what I was doing, but I watched a YouTube tutorial in an attempt to get the steps right. It seemed like it should be a simple enough process: sear the beef, wrap it in prosciutto and puff pastry, and bake. How could that possibly go wrong? The beef searing part went okay at first. I'd made the mistake of using a pan that was too small, so the beef didn't sear evenly, but I pretended like I knew what I was doing. When I went to wrap it in prosciutto, I realized I didn't have enough. I was supposed to have 6 slices, but I only had 4. I thought, no one's going to notice, and proceeded anyway. When I went to wrap it in puff pastry, I accidentally tore a chunk of it. But again, I shrugged it off, hoping the baking process would fix everything. Now, at this point, I was feeling like things weren't going as planned. The soup was looking a little burnt, the beef Wellington looked more like a sad meatball wrapped in a torn pastry, and I still had dessert to make. But I had no choice but to move forward. I stuffed the beef into the oven, set a timer, and decided to start working on the chocolate lava cake. The lava cake recipe was deceptively simple. Just melt chocolate, mix in butter, eggs, sugar, and a little bit of flour, and then bake them in ramekins. At least that's what I thought. What they didn't tell me in the recipe was how crucial it was to get the timing exactly right. But as a rookie baker, I couldn't tell the difference between a perfect batter and one that was a little too thick. I mixed everything together, poured the batter into ramekins, and put them into the oven. Of course, I didn't think to check if the oven temperature was right. I set it to 350 degrees Fahrenheit without even thinking, but I later realized that I had set it to bake everything at the wrong temperature. So, while the lava cakes were in the oven, I noticed a strange smell coming from the kitchen, something that wasn't exactly pleasant. It took me a moment to realize it was the beef Wellington burning. In my panic, I opened the oven door too soon, releasing all the hot air. The kitchen filled with smoke, and I could barely see through the haze. The timer for the soup went off, but I had no idea what to do at that point. Everything was burning, and I was genuinely concerned that I was about to set off the smoke detectors. I grabbed the beef Wellington from the oven, but the prosciutto had melted away, and the pastry had turned into a charred, crispy disaster. I quickly ran the soup under cold water, trying to salvage what was left of it, but it was mostly just a burnt broth at that point. I rushed to pull the lava cakes from the oven, but they were dry and lifeless, no gooey center, just a sad, dense blob of overbaked chocolate. The smoke detectors finally went off, sending me into full-on panic mode. I tried to fan the smoke out of the kitchen with a towel, but it was just too much. The whole place smelled like burnt onions, overcooked meat, and disappointment. My friends started texting me, wondering when they could come over, and I had to tell them that dinner was running late. I was literally crying in frustration, staring at the disaster I had created. Eventually, I gave up on the whole idea. I opened all the windows to air out the house and decided to order pizza. It wasn't fancy, but at least it wouldn't leave us with burnt food and a smoky house. My friends arrived, and I had to awkwardly explain that dinner had not gone as planned. They were really understanding, and we ended up having a great time, but it was one of the most embarrassing things that's ever happened to me. The worst part? The next day, when I went to clean up the kitchen, I discovered that the beef Wellington had caused a grease fire in the oven. There were grease stains everywhere. It was like the universe had decided to add insult to injury. Moral of the story: don't try to impress your friends with things you know nothing about. Stick to what you're good at, and for the love of God, don't attempt beef Wellington unless you have a lot more cooking experience than I do. Never again will I cook for an audience. From now on, it's pizza or takeout, always. TIFU by trying to impress my friends with a homemade pizza and almost burning down my apartment. It all started with a casual conversation with my friends about food. We were hanging out at my place after work, drinking beers, and talking about the usual stuff. The topic of pizza came up, and one of my friends, Sam, mentioned how he had tried making his own pizza dough from scratch the other day. It sounded like a fun challenge, and I figured, hey, I've never tried that before, why not give it a shot? Now, to be clear, I'm not some culinary genius. I can make a basic dinner, like spaghetti or a salad, but when it comes to anything more complex, I usually rely on frozen meals or takeout. But, in that moment, I decided that I was going to show my friends I could do more than just order pizza. I was going to make the perfect homemade pizza from scratch. Sam was proud of his efforts, and I wanted to match his level of excellence. Or, at least, impress everyone enough that they'd stop ordering pizza from the local pizzeria when they came over to my place. The next day, I headed out to the store to buy all the ingredients. Flour, yeast, olive oil, mozzarella, tomatoes, fresh basil, the works. I was feeling confident, maybe a little too confident, considering I had never made pizza dough before. I watched a couple of YouTube videos to get an idea of what I was doing, and everything seemed pretty simple. Just mix the ingredients, let the dough rise, stretch it out, and bake it, they said. Easy, they said. Famous last words. I got home, set everything up in the kitchen, and started with the dough. As I mixed the flour, yeast, and water, it felt a little too sticky, but I figured it would be fine. I kneaded it a bit and put it in a bowl to let it rise. I didn't really follow the rising instructions too closely, figuring my gut feeling would be enough. After about 30 minutes, I checked on it. It hadn't really risen much, but I decided it was good enough and started working on the sauce. I chopped up the tomatoes, threw in some garlic, olive oil, salt, and pepper, and let that simmer on the stove. The sauce was coming along, and I started to feel good about the whole thing. While the sauce simmered, I figured I'd preheat the oven. Now, I don't know what exactly happened, but I may have gotten a little too distracted by the task at hand. I set the oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's supposed to be perfect for pizza, right? Right? I didn't double-check the temperature, I just slammed the oven door shut and walked away. Big mistake. By the time I went back to my dough, it wasn't really dough anymore. It was more like a sticky blob of glue that had spread out across the bowl. I didn't know what went wrong, but I figured I could salvage it. So, I dusted my countertop with flour and tried to stretch it out like the YouTube video suggested. Spoiler alert, I had zero skill at stretching pizza dough. Instead of forming a nice round shape, it looked more like a giant pancake. But hey, I thought, it's going to taste fine anyway, right? The dough wasn't the issue, it was all about the toppings. I quickly shredded the mozzarella and set it aside, then decided to add some extra toppings like pepperoni and olives. I also thought I should add a little more sauce, which was a big mistake. The dough, already a little too wet, started to absorb the sauce, making it even stickier. But, undeterred, I chucked it into the oven, which by this point had been preheated for about 20 minutes at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. I set a timer for 15 minutes and waited. As I stood there, I could already smell something starting to burn. I opened the oven to check, and a plume of smoke greeted me. I had never seen anything like it. The bottom of the pizza was charred beyond recognition, and the top was still a soggy mess. I panicked and pulled it out of the oven, realizing that I had just ruined an entire pizza. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I took the pizza out of the oven, I noticed the smoke was getting thicker. I couldn't see the kitchen clearly through the haze. I quickly opened the window, turned on the fan, and tried to fan away the smoke, but it was no use. The fire alarm in my apartment went off. It was so loud it could probably be heard in the building next door. My friends were still hanging out in the living room, and they came rushing in, looking at me like I had just committed a crime. At this point, I realized that not only had I ruined the pizza, but I also needed to figure out how to stop the smoke. I quickly grabbed the oven mitts and tried to fan the pizza out of the kitchen, but the smoke was everywhere. I accidentally knocked over a bottle of olive oil onto the floor, making everything even worse. In a panic, I grabbed the closest dish towel, soaking it in water, and started waving it around the smoke detector. No matter what I did, the alarm wouldn't stop. My friends were all standing in the doorway, watching me flail around like an idiot, trying to put out the fire alarm with a damp dish towel. Eventually, I managed to get the smoke detector to stop blaring by opening all the windows and leaving the oven door open to let it air out. But by the time everything settled down, I was left standing in the middle of my smoke-filled kitchen, holding a ruined pizza and a dish towel. My friends were mostly silent at first, just staring at the disaster I had created. One of them, Alex, started laughing. "Well, it's certainly memorable," he said. "But maybe we should just order pizza next time." I didn't even have the heart to argue. At that point, I was ready to cry, but instead, I just stared at the charred mess on the baking tray. After all the effort, all the time I had spent trying to impress everyone with my cooking skills, I had ended up with a destroyed kitchen and a pizza that could probably double as a frisbee. So, we did what any reasonable group of friends would do at that point: we ordered pizza. I don't think anyone had the heart to tell me how bad the pizza was. But that's the last time I'll try to impress anyone with homemade pizza. Next time, it's frozen or take out all the way. Honestly, I'll probably just pick up some garlic bread to go with it, because clearly, I'm not cut out for making pizza. Lesson learned: don't try to bake pizza when you have no idea what you're doing, and definitely don't forget to check the oven temperature. Oh, and always double-check that your kitchen's ventilation is ready for the heat. The fire alarm, however, is definitely ready. I'm not sure if my friends will ever let me live this down. It was a typical Saturday afternoon, and I decided to run a quick errand to the grocery store. I'd just gotten my paycheck, and my fridge had been looking pretty barren for the past few days. I'd been living off frozen pizza, takeout, and whatever random snacks I could scrounge up. My plan was simple: get a few essentials, maybe grab some chicken to cook for dinner, and stock up on fruit. I made my list, grabbed my reusable bags, and headed out to the car. The store was pretty busy, as usual, but I didn't think much of it. I was just focused on getting in and out as fast as possible. I breezed through the aisles, picking up the usual stuff: milk, eggs, bread, some pasta, a bunch of bananas. As I wandered through the produce section, I saw an elderly woman struggling to grab a jar from a high shelf. She was on her tiptoes, barely able to reach. I thought, all right, I can be a decent human being today, and went over to offer my help. I reached up, grabbed the jar for her, and handed it over with a smile. She thanked me profusely, which made me feel good for a second. I thought to myself, look at me, doing good deeds. This is the highlight of my day. But of course, life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect them. After that little exchange, I kept going through the aisles. I had a short list, but I was still hunting down a few more items. I decided I'd get some cheese, maybe a couple of bottles of wine, and then I'd head to the checkout. That's when I turned down an aisle I don't usually go down, the home essentials aisle, which had things like candles, cleaning supplies, and random kitchen gadgets. There was this little section with bath products, and a bottle of something caught my eye. It was this fancy-looking bubble bath, lavender-scented, with a pretty purple bottle. I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. I grabbed it and added it to my cart, thinking it might be nice to treat myself after a long week. As I continued to wander, I noticed an older man staring at me from the end of the aisle. He looked a little odd, like he was trying to catch my attention but didn't know how. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe he was just waiting for someone. But then, as I moved closer to the checkout lanes, he followed me. Not in an overtly creepy way, but in a way that made me feel a little uncomfortable. I thought, okay, whatever. Maybe he's just walking to the front. But when I got to the self-checkout area, he was still there, standing a few feet away, watching me. At this point, my internal alarm bells started ringing. But, I thought, just stay calm, it's probably nothing. I quickly scanned my items and bagged them, trying to be as quick as possible. The man, though, didn't seem to be going anywhere. He was still standing in the same spot, watching. I glanced at him again, and this time, I couldn't help but notice he was holding something, a bottle. A bottle that looked suspiciously like the bubble bath I'd just picked up from the shelf. At this point, I was trying not to panic, but it was hard not to feel like something was off. I quickly finished paying for my groceries, grabbed my bags, and headed toward the exit. I heard the shuffle of footsteps behind me. I told myself, he's probably just heading out too, no big deal. But as I reached the sliding doors, the man suddenly stepped in front of me, blocking my way. "Excuse me," he said, his voice strangely calm but insistent. "Is that your bubble bath?" Yeah," I said, confused and still trying to process what was happening. "Why?" The man's face shifted from calm to almost agitated. "I was just wondering," he continued, his eyes scanning me with growing suspicion, "because I think you might have stolen it." I froze. My stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" I asked, feeling both embarrassed and incredulous. "I didn't steal anything." "No," he said, raising his voice slightly, "you took it off the shelf and didn't pay for it. You just grabbed it and put it in your cart." I blinked. "What?" "No, I paid for it. I just bought it. I have the receipt right here." I fumbled with my purse, pulling out the crumpled receipt and holding it up. "Look, I paid for everything. Here's the proof." The man's eyes darted to the receipt, and then back to me. Well, I just thought," before he could finish his sentence, the store security guard appeared out of nowhere, having apparently heard the raised voices. "Is there a problem here?" the security guard asked, looking back and forth between us. The man quickly turned to the guard, pointing at me. "She took the bubble bath. She didn't pay for it." I was floored. "I did pay for it," I said, trying to stay calm. "I have the receipt. It's all right here. I'm not stealing anything." The security guard turned to me, glancing at the receipt and then to the man. He looked at both of us with growing confusion. "Sir, I'm not sure what you're talking about," the security guard said. "This woman has a receipt. She bought all of her items. She's good to go." The man went pale for a second, clearly realizing he had misjudged the situation. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. The security guard turned back to me. "You're all set. Have a good day." The man, now red-faced and looking like he wanted to crawl into a hole, stepped aside and muttered something under his breath before shuffling away. I walked out of the store, trying to shake off the weird encounter, but the whole situation left me feeling unsettled. I drove home, put away my groceries, and sat down on the couch, still trying to process what had just happened. How did I go from helping a lady with a jar on a shelf to being accused of stealing bubble bath? I didn't understand it. And to make matters worse, when I went to unpack everything, I realized something. I'd grabbed the wrong bubble bath. The bottle I had picked up was not the lavender-scented one I thought I'd bought. No, it was a different brand entirely, one with a very, very unusual scent. The bubble bath I had picked up was called Funky Monkey and smelled like bananas. I never did figure out what was going on with the guy, but I can't shake the feeling that my very first helpful moment of the day had somehow come back to haunt me. Either that, or there was some cosmic joke at play. Either way, I'll be avoiding the home essentials aisle from now on. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. It all started on a Monday morning. I had just moved into a new apartment in the city, and like every freshly minted urbanite, I was feeling a mixture of excitement and mild anxiety. The place was a bit small, but it was perfect for me. It had everything I needed, a decent-sized living room, a cozy bedroom, and most importantly, a fully stocked kitchen. The last part was the key for me because cooking had become something of a hobby over the past year. I wasn't some gourmet chef or anything, but I liked to think I was decent enough to impress a guest or two. I had a few days to unpack before starting work, so my plan was simple: organize the place, set up the furniture, and then experiment with some new recipes. I was looking forward to finally cooking without the limitations of my old, tiny kitchen. The first night, I decided to make a homemade lasagna. I found a recipe online that seemed straightforward enough, nothing fancy, just the basics. I spent a couple of hours assembling everything, layering the pasta, sauce, cheese, and meat. I was feeling pretty confident about it. It smelled delicious as it baked in the oven, and my kitchen was filled with the kind of aromas that make you feel like you're living in a food commercial. As the timer went off and I pulled the pan out of the oven, I realized that this was going to be a dinner to remember. That was my first mistake. I set the lasagna on the counter to cool for a few minutes, but my impatience got the best of me. I couldn't wait. I grabbed a fork and decided to cut myself a slice right away. I told myself it was okay, that it would just be a small taste, but of course, one bite turned into two, then three, and before I knew it, I had devoured a sizable portion of the lasagna. But my stomach didn't complain, at least not right away. I finished off the lasagna, washed the dishes, and felt accomplished. I sat on my couch, satisfied, ready to relax for the rest of the night. The next morning, however, I woke up with the worst stomach cramps of my life. I figured it was just a little indigestion from overeating the night before, so I brushed it off and went about my day. But as the hours went on, the pain only intensified. By the time I was getting ready for bed, I was curled up in a fetal position, clutching my stomach and wishing I had never heard of lasagna. The pain continued into the next day, and at this point, I had started to get really concerned. I had no idea what had gone wrong. Was it the meat? The cheese? The sauce? Whatever it was, I was in no shape to go to work, so I called in sick and spent the entire day trying to figure out what had happened. That's when I realized something. While I had been packing and moving things around my apartment, I had noticed that there was something off about the oven in my new kitchen. It didn't seem to heat up properly, and the temperature dial didn't quite match the actual heat. The first night I baked the lasagna, the oven had been at least 50 degrees too high. I had assumed the oven was just quirky and I had adjusted the cooking time to compensate. But apparently, I had overcompensated. My lasagna had been baking at an oven temperature way too high, which meant the outside of the dish was cooked to perfection while the inside was still raw. I had basically poisoned myself with undercooked meat and a whole bunch of other questionable ingredients. As the hours dragged on, I found myself in the bathroom more often than I cared to admit, feeling like a mix of a bloated balloon and a malfunctioning sewage system. I finally decided to call a doctor. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew I needed help. I explained my symptoms and my situation, including the fact that I'd had lasagna the night before. The doctor, after listening to my story and processing everything, gave me a surprisingly stern response: "You might want to stop cooking for a little while." I wasn't sure if I should laugh or cry at that point. It was clear that I had made a huge mistake, and I was paying for it. I ended up spending the next 48 hours in a state of perpetual misery, only able to muster the energy to drink water and eat a few crackers. When the cramps finally subsided and my digestive system returned to something resembling normal, I decided I needed to take responsibility for my actions. The first step, checking the oven. I was embarrassed to admit it, but the oven was indeed faulty. The temperature was wildly inaccurate, and there was no way to properly gauge how hot it was without a thermometer. I could have saved myself all that pain and suffering if I had just checked the oven beforehand. To make matters worse, I had no idea how long I'd been cooking with it in that state, so who knows what other culinary disasters I might have created in the meantime. I immediately called my landlord to report the issue, and after a few days, a repairman came to fix the oven. It wasn't a quick fix, though. Apparently, the heating element had burned out, so it had been malfunctioning for a while. That explained why some of my meals had been coming out unevenly cooked, though I'd always blamed my lack of skill in the kitchen instead of the faulty appliance. While waiting for the repair, I decided to take a break from cooking. I didn't want to risk poisoning myself again, so I stuck to takeout for the next week. I also began to realize how much I had taken my previous kitchen for granted. Sure, it was tiny, but it had always worked. And I never had to worry about an oven making my food potentially lethal. Once the oven was repaired, I started cooking again, but with a new level of caution. I triple-checked the temperature, tested the food thoroughly, and made sure there was no trace of undercooked meat. My lasagna experience had taught me a hard lesson in paying attention to the little things, especially when it comes to kitchen appliances. To this day, I still laugh at the whole situation. It was a stupid mistake, but at least I learned a valuable lesson: never trust an oven you haven't properly tested. Also, never eat an entire lasagna in one sitting. Your stomach will thank you later. But, most importantly, I learned to appreciate the smaller, quieter victories in life, like getting through a meal without needing a trip to the bathroom every 10 minutes. Now, whenever I cook for friends, I always make sure the oven is working properly, and I even bought a meat thermometer, just in case. You can't be too careful when it comes to cooking, especially after an experience like mine. This happened a few days ago, and I'm still cringing just thinking about it. You know how everyone says that in your 20s you're still kind of figuring things out? I've always thought that was a bit of an exaggeration, like, yeah, maybe in your early 20s, but I'm turning 28 next month, and I'm really starting to think they might be right. I should have known this was going to be a disaster from the start. It was my first real office party since I started my new job about 6 months ago. The company is pretty chill overall, but I'm one of the newer employees, and I don't know anyone very well yet. I figured it would be a good chance to get to know some people outside of the usual work context. You know, relax, have some fun, let my hair down. The whole shebang. So, the party is at a local bar, and we're all encouraged to wear something festive. Not exactly a costume party, but they suggested we wear something that made us feel celebratory. This was my first mistake. I'm an overthinker. I tend to second-guess everything, and my usual go-to strategy is to play it safe. So, I decided to go for a simple button-down shirt, dark jeans, and my best pair of boots. Nothing too flashy, nothing too boring. Just right, I thought. Turns out, that wasn't the right call. I show up to the bar at around 7 p.m., and the place is packed. There's music blaring, people chatting, and a few colleagues already deep in conversation, drinks in hand. I walk in, looking around for a familiar face, and immediately realize two things. 1, I'm definitely overdressed, and 2, no one else is wearing something nearly as nice as I am. People are wearing everything from festive sweaters with Christmas lights on them to full-on casual attire. A guy from accounting has a huge foam reindeer antler headband on, and I'm standing there in a crisp button-down shirt that makes me feel like I'm about to give a presentation at a corporate meeting. But okay, I'm here now. I can't just leave, right? I'm not going to let my self-consciousness ruin the night. I take a deep breath and walk up to the bar to grab a drink. I order a beer and try to make small talk with the bartender, but then I see the team from marketing and they wave me over. They're already a few drinks in and in high spirits. I think this is a good opportunity to break the ice, so I go over. Hey, Mike. You made it, one of them says with a big grin. Yeah, hey. Just getting settled in, I say, trying to sound casual. At this point, I'm already starting to feel the social pressure to keep the conversation going. One of them, Sarah, hands me a shot glass. It's a celebration, right? You can't just stand there with a beer. Take a shot. I laugh nervously and glance at my beer. I'm good with this for now, I say. But she insists, come on, it's tradition. I give in. Big mistake. For context, I'm not much of a drinker. I can handle a beer here and there, but shots? Not my thing. The shot is tequila. And not the smooth kind. No, it's the cheap, terrible kind that burns all the way down. But I take it anyway, because I want to seem like I'm part of the group, not some buzzkill who's avoiding fun. Almost immediately after the shot, I feel that familiar dizzying sensation and a slight tightening in my stomach. Not good. But I try to power through and keep the conversation going, making small talk about work and how I've been adjusting to everything. Honestly, I'm just nodding along while my stomach protests, but I figure if I just stay upright and look like I'm having a good time, everything will be fine. Then the unthinkable happens. We're all laughing about some inside joke from work, and I feel a sudden, intense pressure in my stomach. You know the feeling. That awful sensation where you realize you've reached a point of no return, and you're about to either make a very embarrassing dash for the bathroom, or you'll just have to accept the consequences. I don't want to be that guy who runs to the bathroom in the middle of a conversation, so I try to ignore it. Bad idea. The pressure only increases. And before I know it, I'm doing the awkward dance, shifting from foot to foot, trying to make my body behave. That's when it happens. I accidentally let out a small but very noticeable fart. It's loud enough that the entire group goes quiet for a split second. I freeze. Everyone's looking at me. Sarah, who handed me the shot earlier, is staring at me in disbelief, and the guy from accounting with the reindeer antlers slowly raises an eyebrow. I immediately start sweating. I feel my face turn beet red, and my brain starts spinning 1,000 miles a minute. Do I admit it? Do I laugh it off? Do I pretend like nothing happened and just keep talking? I panic. Sorry, I think I just got a little lightheaded from that shot, I say, trying to explain away the sound, but the look on everyone's faces tells me it's not working. It's like they all know exactly what happened, but no one wants to acknowledge it. At this point, I am beyond mortified. I'm not even paying attention to the conversation anymore. I'm just focused on one thing, getting out of there without anyone remembering that I just farted in front of my coworkers. Then Sarah, bless her heart, tries to salvage the situation by laughing. It's okay, Mike. We all do it. It's natural, right, she says, and the group starts chuckling. But for me, it's too late. I'm already mentally preparing to crawl into a hole and die of embarrassment. At this point, I feel like I need to redeem myself, so I throw myself into a new topic. Hey, has anyone tried the nachos here? I ask, hoping to steer the conversation away from the flatulent disaster that just occurred. And of course, that's when my boss, Greg, walks up. He's this larger-than-life figure in the office, always joking around, but also super serious when it comes to work. And of course, he has to stand there and ask, what's going on? Everyone's looking like they just saw a ghost. Before I can answer, Sarah pipes up, Mike just made a big impression, that's all. Everyone bursts into laughter, and I'm just standing there, grinning awkwardly, wishing for a time machine. The rest of the night is a blur. I don't even remember how I made it home, but somehow, I did. The next day, I walk into the office, and it's like nothing happened. But in the back of my mind, I'm still replaying that moment over and over. Now, every time I see anyone from the party, I feel like they're secretly thinking about my embarrassing fart moment. I don't know how to act around them anymore. And to make it worse, my coworkers have started making little jokes about getting lightheaded every time I enter a room. So yeah, TIFU by trying too hard to fit in at my office party and accidentally becoming the guy who farted loudly in front of everyone. Hopefully, it'll blow over. But I'm pretty sure my reputation has officially been released. It all started innocently enough. I had recently moved into a new apartment in a pretty chill part of town, a small, cozy neighborhood tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was a bit of a change from where I had lived before, but everything seemed promising. The apartment was cheap, the neighbors were friendly, and there was a small park just across the street where I could relax and clear my head after a long day of work. It was perfect. Or so I thought. After settling in, I figured I should take the time to get to know my neighbors a bit better. One evening, as I was coming back from a grocery run, I saw an older woman standing near the entrance of the building. She was a bit frail-looking, probably in her late 60s or early 70s, but she had a warm smile on her face and a cane in her hand. I'd seen her a few times in passing, but I hadn't formally introduced myself yet. "Hello," I said, smiling at her. "How's it going?" She perked up and smiled back. "Oh, hello, dear. I'm Mrs. Green, just moved in a few weeks ago." I was a little taken aback. She'd been living here for weeks? How had I not noticed? Maybe I had just missed her, or she was just a quiet neighbor. Anyway, I smiled and we started chatting. Mrs. Green was incredibly sweet, and we had a pleasant conversation about the building, the neighborhood, and the local amenities. She was lovely to talk to, and I made a mental note to check in on her from time to time. It was the neighborly thing to do, right? We exchanged pleasantries, and she invited me over for a cup of tea sometime, to which I graciously accepted. A couple of days later, I took her up on the offer. It was a lazy Saturday afternoon, and I didn't have much planned, so I knocked on her door. She opened it with a smile and a warm invitation into her little apartment. To be honest, it was a bit cluttered, but in the way that felt cozy, like a lived-in space. She had soft, floral-patterned furniture, a lot of knickknacks scattered around, and the smell of freshly baked cookies in the air. "Please, make yourself comfortable," she said as she set a tray of tea and cookies down on the coffee table. I sat down and we continued chatting, the conversation drifting from topics like the weather to the city's history. She had lived in this neighborhood for a long time, having raised her family here, and she was happy to be back after a few years in a retirement community. It was nice hearing about her life and experiences. At one point during our conversation, she leaned in and lowered her voice conspiratorially. "You know," she said, her eyes twinkling, "this place has a bit of a history. Some of the other tenants don't like to talk about it, but I think you should know." I was intrigued, of course. Who doesn't love a good ghost story or a juicy piece of neighborhood gossip? "What do you mean?" I asked. She leaned back and took a sip of her tea, her face serious now. "There are rumors about this building. People say it's haunted." She smiled after she said it, almost like she was testing me. Now, I'm not one to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but the way she said it made me nervous. It was one of those moments where you laugh off the comment, but in the back of your mind, you're wondering if there's something more to it. "Oh, come on," I said, trying to brush it off. "I'm sure it's just people being dramatic." She gave me a knowing look, like she knew something I didn't. "Maybe," she said slowly. "But just keep your eyes open, dear. There's something off about the place sometimes." I didn't think much of it, to be honest. It was probably just some old lady who had lived here a little too long and had seen too many strange things. But after that conversation, I did start to feel a little uneasy when I was in the building. Nothing major, but every once in a while, I'd hear odd creaks or noises at night. Maybe it was just the old pipes, or maybe it was the wind, but something about it made me glance over my shoulder a little more often. It wasn't until about a week later that things took a real turn. One night, after a long day at work, I came home around 10 p.m. I opened the front door to the building and walked in, only to be greeted by an incredibly eerie silence. Now, I'm used to the quiet, but this was different. It was as if the air itself was thick, like everything was holding its breath. I shook it off, of course, just tired, probably. But then I heard it. A soft, dragging sound from the floor above me. I stopped dead in my tracks. It wasn't the normal sounds of people walking around, this was something different. Something deliberate. The sound grew louder, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I briefly considered leaving the building and just going for a walk to clear my head, but I didn't. Instead, I gathered my courage, walked to the stairwell, and started making my way up to the second floor. The sound continued. It was coming from apartment 2B, a place I knew was vacant. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether or not I should knock. What if it was just a neighbor moving furniture around? I didn't want to look silly by barging in and interrupting someone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My curiosity got the best of me, so I knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. I tried the door handle, it was unlocked. I opened the door slowly and stepped inside. The apartment was empty, except for a few pieces of furniture that were covered with dust. But what caught my attention was the large, heavy object in the middle of the floor. It looked like an old wardrobe, tipped over and resting on its side. But the strangest part? The dragging noise had stopped. As I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing, I heard the faintest whisper coming from behind me. It was barely audible, but it sent a chill down my spine. "Leave," the voice hissed. That's when I bolted out of there. I didn't look back. The next day, I did some digging. Turns out, the building did have a history, just not the one Mrs. Green had described. A few years ago, there had been a series of strange occurrences, including tenants leaving in the middle of the night, claiming to hear unexplained noises or seeing figures out of the corner of their eyes. The place had been relatively cheap for a while, and apparently, that's why so many people stayed despite the rumors. I didn't tell Mrs. Green what had happened. I'm not sure if she even knows about the dragging sound or the whispers, but I decided to start looking for a new place to live. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me, waiting. I haven't seen Mrs. Green since that night, but I'm sure she knows something more than she lets on. Something tells me, though, that I don't really want to find out. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a spontaneous romantic dinner that ended in chaos. So, a little background, I, a 24M, have been crushing hard on this girl, Emma, 23F, for a while now. We met a few months ago through some mutual friends, and we've hung out a couple of times, but nothing too serious. Anyway, for the past few weeks, I've been really trying to up my game and show her that I'm a romantic, spontaneous guy. You know, the type of person who can pull off these big, romantic gestures without breaking a sweat. Now, I'm not a chef. At all. I can microwave like a pro, but anything beyond that is a complete mystery to me. But I had this brilliant idea: what if I cook her dinner? You know, make it super special, a surprise, candlelit, the works. Surely, this would impress her, right? I mean, what's more romantic than a home-cooked meal, right? I don't know why I thought I could pull this off, but I was determined to do it. So, I started planning. I'd invite her over to my place under the pretense of watching a movie or something casual. Then, halfway through the night, I'd reveal my grand dinner plans. I figured I could pull it off, and that this would be the moment she realized I was the one. The day before the big dinner, I went all out. I spent hours researching recipes online, watching YouTube videos about easy romantic meals for beginners, spoiler, none of them are easy, and making a shopping list. I ended up going to the grocery store and buying a bunch of ingredients I had no idea how to use. You know, fancy things like fresh basil, risotto rice, and creme fraiche. I don't even know what creme fraiche is, but it sounded fancy, so I bought it. I was feeling pretty confident at this point, thinking to myself, how hard could this be? It's just a couple of dishes, some pasta, a salad, and maybe a dessert. I got this. Fast forward to the evening of the dinner, and I'm in full-on panic mode. I've never made any of these dishes before, and the clock is ticking. I'm trying to chop vegetables, sauté chicken, and manage multiple pots on the stove all at the same time. I've got a bottle of wine open to calm my nerves, not that it was helping, and I'm sweating like crazy because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Meanwhile, my phone is buzzing with text messages from Emma asking what time she should come over. I'm too busy to answer, but I send back something vague like, almost ready. Just finishing up. At this point, the kitchen smells like burnt garlic and whatever the opposite of delicious is. The risotto, which was supposed to be the star of the meal, is a complete disaster. It's too sticky, too soupy, and just not right. The chicken? Dry as hell. I don't even know how that happened. I swear I followed the recipe. As for the salad, I accidentally put way too much balsamic vinegar, and now it's more like a vinaigrette bath than an actual salad. Emma arrives a little earlier than expected, and she knocks on the door just as I'm trying to salvage the situation. I quickly throw on a clean shirt and open the door, trying my best to appear calm and collected. Hey. Welcome. Dinner is almost ready. I say, though I'm pretty sure she can see the panic in my eyes. She walks in, and I immediately try to give her a tour of my place, hoping she won't notice the disaster in the kitchen. But as I walk her into the living room, I catch a whiff of burnt garlic and my stomach does this little flip of horror. She's probably going to run for the hills after she tastes what I've prepared. But no, she smiles, sits down on the couch, and asks if she can help with anything. At this point, I'm in full-on meltdown mode, but I can't let her know how much I've screwed up, so I tell her everything is totally under control. I excuse myself to go check on the food, but as soon as I turn around, I see that the pasta water has started to boil over and spill all over the stove. Panicked, I grab the pot to try to salvage it, but I end up burning my hand in the process. I yelp, holding my hand in the air, and Emma rushes in. "Are you okay?" She grabs my hand and looks at the burn, but of course, I play it off like it's no big deal. "It's fine, just a little burn. No biggie. Dinner is basically ready." She gives me a concerned look but doesn't push it. I get the food onto the table, and we sit down to eat. It's an awkward silence for a moment, with me nervously watching her take the first bite. She chews. Then, she smiles and says, "It's different. But I think I like it." Now, here's the thing, I'm not sure if she genuinely liked it or if she was just trying to be nice, but I wasn't about to let this slip into an uncomfortable silence, so I keep talking. "I'm so glad you like it. I've been practicing cooking for weeks. I really wanted to do something special for you," I say with a nervous laugh. My heart is racing at this point because I'm afraid she's going to realize how much of a disaster this dinner is. She takes another bite, and I'm watching her like a hawk, waiting for her to react. But she just keeps eating. And then she says something that makes my stomach drop. "So, is this the spontaneous dinner you were talking about earlier? Like, surprise dinner kind of thing?" she asks, looking at me curiously. And that's when I realized I had totally messed up. I'd forgotten to tell her that this was supposed to be a surprise. She thought we were just having a regular dinner. She had no idea this was supposed to be my big romantic gesture. Feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over me, I laugh awkwardly. Yeah. Surprise dinner. Totally. Just wanted to make it fun and spontaneous." But at that moment, I knew it was all falling apart. We ate the meal in silence, and she tried her best to be polite. When she left, she gave me a hug and thanked me for dinner, but I could tell she was a little weirded out. So, that's how I tried to impress my crush with a romantic dinner that ended in disaster. I'm never cooking again. Ever. I'm sticking to microwaving frozen pizza from now on. TIFU by accidentally sending a heart emoji to my boss after a really stressful day. So, I work in a small marketing company, and my boss, let's call him Steve, is a fairly laid-back guy. Not overly formal, but definitely the type who expects results and doesn't mind calling people out when they slip up. I've been working there for about 2 years, and while I've had my share of embarrassing moments, this one, oh man. This one tops them all. It all started on a Wednesday. Not just any Wednesday, but one of those days where everything that could go wrong, did. First, I arrived at work a little late. That's my fault, I hit snooze one too many times, but whatever, I've done it before and survived. No biggie. However, as I walk in, I realize that my desk is buried under a mountain of paperwork, coffee cups, and half-eaten snacks. Apparently, I'd left it like that the day before, and in my rush to get things together for the day, I didn't bother to clean up. No problem, right? I just shove it to the side and get to work. But then I opened my email. The first email of the day was from a client. They were unhappy with the latest campaign, and honestly, after reading their email, I could totally see why. We'd missed some key points in their brief and the visuals weren't up to the standard they expected. In short, they were threatening to pull their account if things didn't improve. I immediately started to panic, but I knew I had to act fast. I gathered the team, and we spent the next 2 hours reworking the entire proposal. By the time we had something presentable, it was already noon, and I had barely even eaten breakfast. I grabbed a quick sandwich, and then, while stuffing my face, I glanced at Slack. A message from Steve popped up. "Hey, do you have the updated metrics for the Q1 campaign? I need them for the board meeting this afternoon." I stared at the message for a solid minute. I had totally forgotten to pull those metrics. The board meeting was a big deal, and Steve was counting on me to get the numbers right. So, naturally, I started to scramble. The next hour was spent trying to pull accurate data, cross-referencing various reports, and typing up a brief explanation of everything. My brain was fried at this point, and I was desperately trying to finish it before the meeting. When I finally sent Steve the updated report, I thought, okay, that's it, I'm done. I can finally breathe for a second. But then Steve responded almost immediately. "Thanks. I just need one more thing. Can you review this presentation? It's the one we're using for the meeting. It's going to need a bit of tweaking." At this point, I was ready to pull my hair out. But, of course, I said sure and opened the presentation. Steve's presentation was, well, let's just say, it wasn't great. It was clear he had just thrown something together last minute. Bullet points everywhere, misaligned text, and absolutely no flow. I started fixing things, tweaking the layout, adjusting the content, and adding some visuals where I could. This took me another hour. So, by the time I sent him the updated version, I was fully burnt out. Finally, it was time for the board meeting. I had been invited to sit in as the marketing rep, and I knew Steve was expecting me to be on top of everything. As we all filed into the conference room, I took my seat, trying to hide how utterly exhausted I was. I had barely had time to collect my thoughts, and I wasn't sure if I could keep my eyes open for the next hour and a half. The meeting went on, and things weren't going too badly. Steve was presenting, I was watching, occasionally chiming in when he asked for input. However, by the time we got to the section where Steve had to present the new proposal to the client, I was barely hanging on. Now, here's the crucial part. I was sitting there, half zoning out, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Steve. He had texted me a quick question about the numbers in the report I'd sent him earlier, and since I was still too out of it to think straight, I decided to quickly reply. I opened my phone, started typing, and I thought I'd sent a simple response, "Got it, I'll check those numbers again." Except, what I actually sent was, "Got it, I'll check those numbers again, red heart." Yes. I accidentally sent a heart emoji to my boss in the middle of a super serious board meeting. Now, this was a mistake I didn't notice right away. Steve had the phone on silent, and I had already closed the conversation, thinking nothing of it. But then, I heard my phone buzz a few seconds later. I glanced down, only to see a message from Steve, "Did you just send me a heart?" My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, utterly frozen. I didn't know what to say, but I knew I had to fix it. Fast. I tried to play it cool and responded, "Haha, no idea what happened there. Must have been an autocorrect mistake." Which, in hindsight, was probably one of the worst excuses I could have given, but I was in full panic mode. The rest of the meeting was a blur. I could feel Steve's eyes on me, and I was convinced everyone could tell something was off. My face was redder than a lobster, and I was 100% sure that everyone in that room was silently judging me. After the meeting, Steve didn't mention the emoji again, but I could tell he was holding in some laughter. I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. The next morning, I came into the office, fully prepared for some kind of awkward conversation. But instead, Steve greeted me as usual, with nothing more than a small, sly grin on his face. It was clear he was letting it go, but I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or if he was just waiting for the perfect moment to bring it up again. For the next few weeks, every time we exchanged messages, I found myself overthinking every single text I sent. It's been a month now, and I'm still waiting for Steve to drop the "remember that time you sent me a heart emoji" bomb. I honestly don't know what's worse, The fact that I sent a heart emoji to my boss, or that I still can't look him in the eye without feeling like I've committed some sort of corporate crime. But hey, lesson learned: never, ever, ever let your guard down around your boss, especially when it comes to text messages. And if you do, make sure it's not in the middle of a high-stakes board meeting. And to anyone reading this, if you accidentally send your boss a heart emoji, just own it. It's better than pretending you didn't do it. Trust me. TLDR, accidentally sent a heart emoji to my boss during an important board meeting. Spent the rest of the day wondering when he'd bring it up. Still haven't recovered. So, here's the thing. I recently made a very poor decision that somehow spiraled into one of the most embarrassing, frustrating, and downright chaotic days of my life. It all started with an innocent desire to help my mom with a small favor. I'm in my mid-20s, living on my own in a small city a few hours away from home. I try to make it back to visit my mom and dad at least once a month, and this particular weekend, I had no plans. My mom, being the sweet but overbearing type, called me on Friday morning asking if I could help her pick up a couple of things from the store. She had bought a new washing machine that needed to be picked up, and since my dad was away on a business trip, she was alone to handle the delivery. Now, I'm not the strongest guy in the world, but I figured, how hard could it be to just grab some heavy boxes from the store and bring them home? I was feeling optimistic and confident. So I agreed to help. When I got to her place later that afternoon, she greeted me with a giant smile, which was both endearing and, in hindsight, a little misleading. She handed me a list of things to pick up. I looked at the list, and it was mostly just household items, light bulbs, laundry detergent, and a few odds and ends. But then, I noticed something odd at the very bottom of the list. It read, "Remember, the washing machine is heavy. Get a hand truck or a dolly to move it." I thought this was weird since I assumed the store would take care of moving the washing machine, but I figured I must have misunderstood. It was only a couple of miles to the store, so I told her I'd be back in about an hour. I drove to the local hardware store, and when I walked in, I could see the washing machine standing right at the front. It was sitting on a wooden pallet, which seemed to be some sort of safety precaution. The employee behind the counter greeted me and asked if I needed help loading the machine into my car. I told him I was just here to pick it up, and he pointed me toward the loading dock. Now, I should mention that I drive a sedan. Not a truck, not a minivan, but a small sedan. I know. This should have been my first red flag. But in my mind, I thought, it's just a washing machine. It's not that big, right? I went back to the car, got out the trunk, and tried to open it. The machine was heavy, sure, but it wasn't impossible to move. Well, that was before I realized how awkward it would be to fit an entire washing machine into my car. There was no way it would fit. Not even close. But at this point, I had no idea what to do. I was at the store, the car was open, and I had no plan B. The employee noticed my growing panic and came over. He asked if I needed help, and I said, yeah, I need some kind of dolly or hand truck, like, right now. He nodded, walking toward the back of the store. I thought to myself, okay, this is fine. I'll just roll it onto a dolly, no big deal. But then I realized, I had no idea how to get the washing machine off the pallet. It was like it was bolted onto the wood. So now, I'm standing there, staring at this giant box, with zero clue how to move it. The employee came back with a hand truck. It was one of those industrial-grade ones with big, sturdy wheels and a heavy metal frame. "Here you go," he said. "This should work. Let's get it loaded up for you." I thought to myself, finally, someone who knows what they're doing, so we tried to slide the machine onto the dolly. We used a combination of pushing, pulling, and shoving. At this point, I had sweat dripping down my forehead, and I'm sure I was looking less like a helpful son and more like a guy who had completely lost control of the situation. The employee gave me a sympathetic glance and said, "You might want to take the long way around to avoid traffic." I barely even acknowledged him as I loaded the washing machine onto the dolly. I pushed it over to the car, cursing my decision to drive a sedan. But somehow, we got it into the car. I was holding my breath as we attempted to close the trunk. Miraculously, it worked, though the car's suspension might have been another matter entirely. It was like the washing machine had just eaten up all the trunk space and was now a permanent resident of my vehicle. The drive back to my mom's place was a tense, sweaty ordeal. Every bump in the road sent the washing machine swaying dangerously in the trunk, and I was gripping the wheel like my life depended on it. I couldn't even get the radio to calm my nerves because the only thing on my mind was the thought of that giant box toppling out of the back and wrecking my car, or worse, hitting another car. I finally pulled into her driveway, feeling a mix of relief and dread. I quickly got out of the car, hoping to unload the washing machine without further incident. But here's where things went downhill fast. As I was pulling the washing machine out of the trunk, one of the wheels on the dolly caught on the curb, and I lost control. The dolly tipped over, and the washing machine crashed to the ground with a thunderous bang. I stood there, frozen, staring at the heap of metal and cardboard in my driveway. At this point, I thought about just driving away and pretending this had never happened, but my mom was already watching from the window. She ran outside, eyes wide with panic, and started yelling my name. "What happened? Is everything okay?" Yeah, everything's fine. Just a little mishap," I stammered. But the washing machine was now resting at an angle, and the cardboard box was ripped. There was no hiding this disaster. We somehow managed to get it into the house, but it didn't end there. As we started unpacking the machine, we realized that the damage was worse than we thought. The exterior was scraped up, and the protective packaging had been compromised. The washing machine had definitely seen better days. I had to call the store to explain the situation. To make matters worse, they informed me that they couldn't replace the damaged machine because I had already taken it out of the store. Apparently, their policy was strict, and the delivery driver wasn't going to be able to come until the following week. So, now my mom was stuck with a damaged washing machine. I was $500 poorer, and I was thoroughly humiliated. The moral of the story? When your mom asks you to pick up a washing machine, don't do it in your sedan without a proper plan. And, for the love of God, always get a truck. It all started on a lazy Saturday morning. I had the day off work, so I decided to take it easy. My plans were simple: wake up late, make some breakfast, catch up on some shows, and just enjoy the quiet. But, as you may have guessed, nothing goes according to plan when you least expect it. The first thing I did when I woke up was grab my phone to check for any urgent messages. As I was scrolling through emails and messages, I realized that I had forgotten to feed my dog, Max, the night before. He usually has a set routine, and I always give him his dinner before bed. But somehow, in the blur of my evening, I had forgotten to serve him his food. Max is a picky eater, so when he doesn't get fed on time, he's not shy about letting me know. He started barking loudly, and it wasn't the playful "I'm excited to see you" kind of bark. No, this was more of a "hey, you've forgotten something important, and I'm not going to let you forget it" kind of bark. I sighed and got out of bed to make it up to him. I shuffled into the kitchen, still groggy, and prepared his breakfast. As I did so, I couldn't help but feel a little guilty about neglecting him the night before. I made sure to give him a little extra love and attention, hoping it would make up for my mistake. After he ate, I decided to go for a walk with Max to get some fresh air and clear my head. It was one of those rare perfect mornings, where the sun was out, the weather was just warm enough, and the birds were singing. The walk started out well, but it didn't take long for things to go downhill. We were walking through a quiet neighborhood, passing by houses with well-maintained lawns and flowers in full bloom. I was checking my phone while Max happily sniffed around, when I noticed a neighbor a few houses down waving at me. I waved back, and then she waved even more enthusiastically. This, of course, caught Max's attention, and before I could stop him, he took off running toward her. Max is fast. Really fast. And before I knew it, I was running after him, yelling his name, hoping he would come back. But he was in full I'm on an adventure mode, and nothing was going to slow him down. I looked up and saw the neighbor standing by her front door, smiling in that way people do when they think they're about to be helpful but don't realize they're about to make the situation worse. "Hey. I think your dog's coming over here," she called out in a sing-song voice. I was already halfway down the street by then, sweating and panicking, trying to catch up with Max, who was now happily jumping around her yard. I could feel my heart racing, and not from the exercise. Max had made it clear that he loved to visit other people, especially if they had treats or a big backyard. The last thing I wanted was for him to become a regular at her house, and I didn't want to be that person who let their dog run wild and annoy the neighbors. By the time I reached Max, he was happily rolling around in the grass, acting like the world's happiest dog. The neighbor was standing there with a puzzled but kind look on her face. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I was out of breath and sweating buckets, but I smiled and tried to act calm. Yeah, everything's fine. He's just really excited today." I grabbed Max by his collar and turned to leave, but then I heard her say, "Well, he's such a sweet dog. You should bring him by more often, maybe we could let him play with our dog sometime." I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I smiled, nodded, and quickly muttered, "Sure, maybe sometime. Thanks," and practically dragged Max back down the street. Once we got back home, I was already dreading the rest of the day. I was supposed to be enjoying a quiet Saturday, but it had quickly turned into an exhausting, mildly embarrassing ordeal. I decided to try and salvage what was left of my day by going inside, getting some food, and finally relaxing. That's when I made the mistake of checking my front porch. Earlier in the morning, I had ordered a few things online, nothing extravagant, just some cleaning supplies and a few odds and ends. I hadn't even thought about the delivery when I left for the walk. But when I saw the package on my doorstep, I knew exactly what was inside. My new, highly anticipated air fryer had arrived. Now, I had been planning to do a little treat-yourself moment and cook something delicious in the air fryer, but seeing the box made me realize just how tired I was after the walk with Max. I didn't want to cook. I didn't want to do anything. But then, I remembered the box and how excited I had been when I ordered it. I'd been reading about air fryers for weeks, watching all these recipes online, and dreaming of the possibilities. So, against my better judgment, I decided to go ahead and set it up. As I opened the box and pulled the air fryer out, I was so caught up in the excitement of the new gadget that I didn't notice the slight wobble in the box. It wasn't until I set it down on the counter that I realized the fryer was slightly dented. The box had been clearly mishandled in transit. The dent wasn't massive, but it was enough to make me frown. Still, I figured it would be fine. I wasn't about to send it back after waiting so long for it to arrive. I plugged it in and decided to try making some French fries, just to see how well it worked. The fryer heated up quickly, and I threw in some frozen fries I had in the freezer. I stood there, watching it cook, thinking about how my life was about to get infinitely better with this new kitchen appliance. About 10 minutes in, I started to notice a strange smell. It wasn't the usual cooking fries smell. It was more like something was burning. I opened the air fryer and immediately saw that the fries were starting to blacken, even though I had followed the instructions to the letter. That's when I realized the fryer was overheating and the dent from shipping was probably causing some malfunction. I turned the fryer off, unplugged it, and opened the window to let the smell out. I felt a mix of frustration and embarrassment. Not only had my lazy Saturday turned into a chaotic mess, but now I had a broken air fryer to deal with too. To make matters worse, Max had been pacing around the kitchen, looking at the fries like they were the greatest thing he had ever seen. He hadn't gotten enough of his breakfast earlier, and now he was begging for whatever I was cooking. The situation was a disaster, and I couldn't help but laugh. What was supposed to be a relaxing day had turned into a series of unfortunate events, one after the other. By the time I finally sat down, Max was curled up next to me, looking satisfied despite the chaos. I realized I'd spent most of the day running after him, fixing my mistakes, and trying to salvage things, only to end up sitting there exhausted with a broken air fryer, an overactive dog, and a day that had gone completely off track. But you know what? It was still one of those days I wouldn't forget. Even when everything goes wrong, sometimes the messes are the moments that end up making the best stories later on. And hey, I'm sure I'll figure out the air fryer thing eventually, right after I go apologize to my neighbor for Max's uninvited visit. So, this all started about 3 months ago. I had just moved into a new apartment and was still getting settled in. It was a relatively small space, but cozy. I had a few friends over for a housewarming party, and everything was going well. People were laughing, music was playing, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. But of course, when you have a group of friends over, things tend to get interesting. One of my friends, let's call him Jake, has a bit of a reputation for getting a little too wild at parties. He's the kind of guy who doesn't know where the line is, and once he's had a few drinks, the line ceases to exist entirely. On this particular night, he'd been on his second or third round of shots when the mood of the party shifted slightly. Everyone was laughing and joking around when Jake suddenly started acting a little off, nervous, twitchy, and pacing in the corner of the living room. At first, no one paid much attention, but then he started muttering to himself. Should I? Should I not? No, I shouldn't, or should I? He said under his breath, kind of to himself, kind of to the whole room. At this point, everyone was getting curious, but we all knew better than to ask Jake what was going on when he was this far gone. That was usually a recipe for chaos. But then, out of nowhere, he took a deep breath, stood up straight, and announced to the whole party, "All right, I'm doing it." We all looked at him with a mixture of confusion and dread. Jake didn't usually announce his plans like this. He just did things without warning, which meant whatever was coming next was going to be interesting. Doing what? I asked, half-jokingly, though my gut told me this wasn't going to end well. He gave me a look that said, "You'll see," and then went to the front door. That's when I noticed he was holding something in his hand. It was a small, shiny object that looked suspiciously like a remote control. I thought for a second. A remote control? Where the hell did he get that? And then it clicked. He had a drone. A drone that he had been talking about getting for months but hadn't yet shown us. He had been bragging about how he was going to be the first person in our group to get one and how it was going to change everything. Apparently, tonight was the night he was going to take it out for a spin. Jake, no, I said quickly. You don't want to fly that thing inside. You'll break something. He waved me off. I know what I'm doing. I got this. He went out the front door and, just as we were all starting to relax again, we heard a loud whoosh followed by a bang. Immediately, we ran outside, and that's when we saw the most ridiculous sight I've ever witnessed. Jake, looking triumphant, was standing under a tree with a drone stuck in its branches. The drone was still buzzing, desperately trying to free itself, but it was clearly stuck. A few of us went to help him get it down, but it was out of reach. The drone's propellers were spinning wildly, and the whole thing was buzzing like a mosquito on steroids. I could already tell this was going to be one of those moments we'd laugh about for years, if we ever made it out of this alive. But no, Jake wasn't about to admit defeat. Oh no. He looked at the tree, and then, for reasons that only make sense when you're a few drinks in, he decided to climb it. I still don't know what possessed him to think this was a good idea, but he started shimmying up the tree like it was no big deal. A few of us were yelling at him to stop, but Jake was on a mission. By now, everyone else at the party had gathered outside, watching with a mix of amusement and concern. I was honestly kind of impressed that Jake was this determined. But I knew that if he didn't get that drone out of the tree, this was going to escalate even further. I was about to walk over to him to help when I heard a loud crack and then an even louder thud. Everyone went silent. Jake had fallen. But he didn't just fall. No, he fell in the most spectacular way possible. As he came down, he managed to grab onto a branch that wasn't strong enough to hold his weight. The branch snapped, and he came crashing down into a bush below. His legs were tangled in the branches, and he was tangled up like a cartoon character caught in a net. To make matters worse, the drone, which had miraculously freed itself, came crashing down right on top of his head. It was quiet for a second. We all stared at Jake, who was groaning in the bush, covered in branches and leaves, with the drone still buzzing away on the ground next to him. I was half concerned for his safety, but honestly, the other half of me was fighting to keep a straight face. "Jake, are you okay?" someone asked. He groaned again, but this time with a touch of pride in his voice. "I'm fine. I got the drone. Look." He picked it up and waved it in front of us like it was some kind of trophy. There was a collective sigh of relief from the group. At least Jake hadn't broken anything important, like his neck. We helped him out of the bush, and after a few more rounds of laughter and mock scolding, we got him inside to sit down. Everyone was still chuckling, but I could tell that Jake wasn't done yet. The next day, I found out that he had sent a video of his drone mishap to all of our group chats with the caption, "Told you I got this." Jake may have been a little too wild that night, but he was right about one thing. That party was definitely one for the books. It's been 3 months, and every time we get together, someone inevitably brings up the night Jake tried to fly the drone into the tree. And honestly, I can't blame them. But here's the part where I truly fucked up. I didn't think it could get worse. I didn't think things could possibly escalate any further. Then Jake told me he was going to do it again. And, of course, he did. This time, in an even more dangerous and ridiculous way. This time, he didn't just try to fly the drone inside. No. He attempted to fly it off the roof. And naturally, he wasn't going to wait for the sun to set to try it out. No, Jake was going to try it during the middle of the day, when we had all just gotten home from a long day of work. What could possibly go wrong? Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.